So simply relax where you are and taking in a breath. Hmm. And I feel that freedom as my body expands to accept this life that is always present, always rushing to meet me, always available. And so I know that this is the source for all that is created from it, from itself, its substance. And that everything that I experience is this divine substance, this spirit, this God, this presence, this life. And so I hold this life to be good, for it shows up always, always available, always presenting itself to me. It is always showing up as my life. And I'm so grateful for the body that I am given to experience and enjoy through my senses, through my mind, all that is. And so today, as I recognize myself and this presence within me, living me, each and every moment, I know that this is the truth for all, that all are freely given this life with unlimited possibilities. For there is no strict structure, there is no boundary that holds back the abundance, the good, the life, the freedom. And so I claim this freedom. I claim this freedom to not live as a dress rehearsal, to not live as a performance, but to live fully, freely, being all that I choose to be in each and every moment, for that is an unlimited, eternal state. And that I am not held back by any thought, by any old belief. I allow myself to stretch out and expand into the allness that is this life that I am held in right now. And I know that this gift of spirit, this freedom, is given to all. And I bless and enjoy and give great thanksgiving for all of the freedom that is expressed, all of the freedom and the being all, the greatness, the beauty, the splendor, the creativity, the goodness that is expressed through each and every person and through every experience. And I am grateful for all that is shown in this freedom in my world. And so I release this knowing it is already the truth, already done, and I simply claim it, and so it is.
This whole month, we're working with the idea of, actually, for the whole year, we're working with the idea of growing deeper, rising higher. Yes, growing deeper, rising higher. And this month, we are looking at oneness, and we are looking at what I call the paradox of oneness. Because have you noticed that oneness sometimes feels like more than oneness? Two-ness, three-ness, 8 billionness. Because it shows up in multiplicity, and yet it's still all one. There's still a unity involved behind all of that. Yes, I'm laughing at my friends back here from Unity. So last week we looked at fear is faith. We looked at that faith is, we don't need more faith. We'll have 100% of all the faith we're ever going to have, right? You can't get more faith. But you can direct your faith in different directions. And so you can direct it towards what you want more of or what you fear of having more of, yes? And whatever you have faith in is what is going to show up in your life. Emma Curtis Hopkins, who was an early New Thought writer in the 1880s, cautioned people to stop believing in a mixture of good and evil. A mixture of good and evil. Most of us believe in some mixture of it. Well, if things get too good, they're going to have to adjust and go back down, right? The other shoe is going to drop. Anybody ever have that little, I know at least one person in the room and has their hand up that has that going on. I know actually of a second person in the room, that me. And so working with that idea. So what do I actually have faith in? So that's what we looked at last week. This week we're looking at sexuality, bondage is freedom. No, we're not looking at sexuality. Bondage is freedom. Bondage is freedom. And initially that idea seems, wait, what? No. But freedom is the only agenda of the universe. On very first page of the Science of Mind textbook, Ernest Holmes says the only agenda of the universe is freedom. Bondage is not God ordained. In other words, there's no big guy in the sky or nothing out there that wants us to be held in lack, limitation, constriction, or any of that stuff. We are freedom itself. That is the nature of the universe. Yes? Breathe. Take that in. So it's our true divine state, but we have the freedom to create the experience of bondage, the experience of restriction, just like we had the freedom to create the experience of the world being flat for hundreds of years. It wasn't flat, but we had the experience collectively of that, yes? Not we, but our ancestors back then. So we have the freedom to create experiences out of that. The truth is a complete totality. It's whole as it is. It just is what it is. It never changes. Yes? But our experience of it can. Richard Rohr, I've been playing with his works on what he calls the cosmic egg, which are multiple layered stories that are nested together. And the final story is called The Story, which is the cosmic story. It's not what we think is the story, but it is the story, whether we know it or not, whether we believe it or not. And it's not necessarily the one we think that it is. So this truth, this complete totality is what it is, and it can't be broken into parts. There's no partial truth. There's only capital T truth. There's only the wholeness, because there is nothing, as Ernest Holmes says, with which, by which, or through which to divide the truth. There's nothing unlike itself. There's nothing outside of it to divide it with, so it can't be parted out. There's nothing that isn't truth. There's nothing that isn't God. So an example of this is you can take your car apart and reassemble it, and you'll have a running car, yes? If you do it right. Maybe not you, but you know somebody who could, right? But you can't take your dog apart and reassemble it and have a living dog anymore, right? Should we experiment with Chloe? And no, let's not. Okay, so you can't do that. And so it is with truth. There's no mixture of good and evil. There's no bondage or freedom in truth. However, just as we could insert motors into the dog and make it look like it's alive, we can create the experience or the appearance of bondage, of constriction, of restriction. Does that make sense? We can create what looks, it's not real, but we can create the experience so that it appears and feels real to us. But it's still not the truth. And just as life exists in totality everywhere, the forms and expressions differ, but life itself is everywhere present. Nudge your neighbor and say, you are life being present. You are life being present. So life is everywhere present, always present. Scientists keep finding new awarenesses that even what we thought was formerly to be lifeless has some life energy in it in some way or another. Yes? We talked about the planet. In old days, it was just this dead thing that we lived on, and we're finally realizing, no, there's a life to it. There's a life energy to the planet itself. So just as life exists everywhere, truth, in this case, the truth of freedom, exists everywhere, even in places where we may not perceive it. I was watching an interview recently with Nelson Mandela, who talked about when he was in prison, even though he was in this prison outside, he realized the prison was outside of him, and inside of him was still freedom. He was free internally. Viktor Frankl had the same experience in the Nazi concentration camps, where he chose something different than what the externals were trying to convince him of. And that is our walk, that oftentimes the externals are trying to convince us of something that is not capital T truth, and to remember that within us, to go within, to stay in that centered place. So we say God is everywhere. Yes? One of our favorite little phrases in the youth church is, there is no spot where God is not. Right? And so just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not there, right? Okay. One of the effects, and by see it, I don't even mean visual, I mean our perception. We may not see it. One of the practices of, the effects of spiritual practices is to be able to see God more fully, to see the divine more fully everywhere, always. So that that which appears to be limited is really the limitless showing up as the limited, because we've created that in our life, either individually or collectively, right? But the limitless itself is not actually limited, because it's limitless, right? What looks like limitation in reality is only our limited seeing that creates the appearance of limitation. So as we understand that, we see that if it's our perception that sees and creates our experience of limitation, that what needs to change is our perception. Our perception. And at first, this may only look like an affirmation, something like, I know the divine is at work here. Even if I don't see it, I know the divine is at work here. Right? There is God here. There is good here. Even when I can't see it. But I know that there has to be, because that's the capital T truth of the nature of the universe, is it's here anyway. Breathe. And it doesn't always feel like some divine expression of infinite good, yes? Okay? But if we can walk in trust, I was going to go down a path, and I'm not going to go down that path. But if we can walk in trust, if we can walk in what Howard Thurman calls remembered radiance, our perceiving eyes will adjust and we will see the divine that is always there in everything. If you've ever walked into a dark room, it takes a moment for your eyes to adjust, but then you notice that there's light still in the room, yes? Usually. If you walk out of a dark room into the bright light, it takes a moment for your eyes to adjust to perceive. So what we're being called for in life is for our eyes, our perception eyes, to adjust to see the divine that we might not see with our limited vision, with our conditioned vision. So the divine that is always there in everything. So how did we get into bondage and the experience of bondage in the first place? Well, there was this couple named Adam and Eve. No, I'm just teasing. We got there through stories. The poet Muriel Rukeyser says that the universe is not made of atoms, it's made of stories. Isn't that profound? So we got there by stories, other people's stories, oftentimes that we took on as our own. And just as we are individualized expressions of an infinite wholeness, we are also at the human level individualized expressions of the collective consciousness and the collective unconsciousness. I don't have a personal disease. I have the collective belief in disease showing up in my body. Got the difference? Now, I may have personalized it. I may have taken it on, but there's a larger collective soup that I live in. And this is what we do with spiritual practice, is to start to separate ourselves from, step away from that collective consciousness and say, wait a minute, is that really true? Is that really the capital T truth? Is that really what I want to embody? That's what we do in teachings like this. So we oftentimes, when we were very young, took on stories from the collective mind. My daughter, when she was 6.5 years old is when her mom and I separated and divorced. And I remember one day we were talking, and she says, "I know why you divorced." And I said, "Why is that?" She says, "Because I was messy when I took baths. I got splashed water all over the place. I got toys outside of that." And I looked at her and I said, "Yep, you're right. That's what caused our divorce." And she's been in therapy ever since. No, that's not true. But she did say that. And this is our 6.5-year-old perception of life, is I'm magically causing everything out here to happen and taking it on that it's my responsibility. And yes, I did talk to her and say, no, it has nothing to do with that. So let's take a look at the layers of the stories. Stuff happens when we make up a story, when we create a meaning about any event. So I can walk up to a person and give them a pat on the shoulder, and a person can take that as being a friendly gesture. They can take it as being physical assault. They can take it as being inappropriate sexual touching. They can take it as conspiracy between two people. They're trying to send a signal. Or make it up, right? Just a simple pat on the shoulder can be made up by anything. And we bring our own agenda to it. Anais Nin said, we don't see things as we are, we see them as we are. We don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. So if I think everything's a conspiracy theory, what am I going to see life as? A conspiracy theory. If the only tool I have in my tool belt is a hammer, everything looks like a yes. So this is the collective conscience that we see. So we bring to every event what we already believe and then interpret it through that filter. Somebody was whining over there. So let's look more deeply into our stories. And this comes from the book, What's in the Way is the Way, which is a fabulous book by Mary O'Malley. So Sam, if you can bring up that little chart, the first part of it. So things happen, and we interpret them. And so the first thing we find is we first feel separate from life. We're there, yes. We have a foundational belief. There are two foundational beliefs in this. The first one is we feel separate from life. I call this the original sin. It's our original error thought. See, we live on a 4.5 billion-year-old planet that's existing in a 13 and almost a half billion-year universe, yes? Give or take a few days. Where life has been constantly evolving and expressing and showing up, at this point in time as us. I read a book one time that compared the entire history of the universe to the length of a football field, and we are a little portion, the human beings are a little portion of the last blade of grass before the end zone. 100 yards, little part of the last blade of grass before the end zone. We have 7 trillion cells that pump blood through, are you ready for this? 60,000 miles of blood vessels in your body. Breathe. That's twice around the earth with some more to spare. Okay? We have a body that sends signals through our nerves at speeds of up to 275 miles an hour. We have cells that know how to repair and replace themselves without our even being aware. How many of you are aware that you're replacing and repairing cells right now? I mean, like really, really aware of the cell itself, not just aware of the concept, but aware of the actual experience. No, you're not. So all this is happening without our even being aware, and yet we make up this story that we're separate from life. How silly. Because we don't perceive all that happening. And then we combine that with the second one, which is life is not safe. Because have you noticed life doesn't always work out the way that I want it to? Dang. Right? The power goes out and I have to reset the clocks. Life hates me. It's against me. My daughter was from that example I gave. From our limited childhood view, and all of these stories formed by the time we were 6, by the way. So think of the perspective we have as a 6-year-old. Think of how good we are at making meanings that are wide open and perceptive and really taking in all that's happening. Not. Okay? So I conclude that life isn't safe. Now, once I have been hooked into those two foundational beliefs, I start to operate my life from three other beliefs. So let's take a look at the next one of those. So we decide the three that I must control life because it's not safe. Yes? By the way, this chart is going to be on our website later on. But I must control life in order to get what I want and not get what I don't want. And frankly, a whole lot of us spend more time trying to control life to not get what we don't want than we do to get what we really do want. Yeah? Okay. And then the way I control life is by the next one, which is doing it right. Now, what is right? It's my story about what is right. Yes? And then life is no longer, when I'm living like this, life is no longer something to be experienced and enjoyed. If you look at a little 1 or 2-year-old running around, I've got a park behind my house, and every once in a while I see these little kids that'll get out of the cars, and there's toys to play with, things to climb on, and they get out of the car and they go running across, screaming in delight, and it's like, that's us, by the way. It still lives within us, but we've gotten conditioned out of it by, I've got to do life, and I've got to do it right, instead of just enjoying and appreciating life. But since life then can't be controlled, have you noticed? Since the infinite, capital L life, the infinite presence can't be controlled, not really, we eventually hit number 5, the next one, which is the third operational spell, which is, I'm not doing it right enough. Since it's not showing up the way that I want it to, I must not be doing it right enough. Breathe. Trust me, we're all caught in this process until we escape it, until we free ourselves from it, So if we stay trapped, then our practice is to cycle back to, if I'm not doing it right enough, I got to try harder and do it righter. Yes? I'm doing the same thing over and over, or maybe I try to find a better and righter way to do it, to work harder, to try and do it more right. So again, we're doing life, not experiencing life. But eventually we finally slide into the hidden spells, which is the next one, beginning with, because I'm not doing it right, I am wrong. It moves from the doingness is wrong to I myself am wrong. Yes? Breathe, keep breathing. The story moves from it's not right to I'm not right, which triggers off the final 2 spells. So the next one, number 7, I'm unlovable. And number 8, the core fear and belief, I'm alone. I'm all alone, which comes right back to the first belief that I'm separate from life. Got that? Okay. I am separate from life. So we actually live in this magnificent, unlimited, ever-evolving life and freedom. That's the capital T truth that we live in. But have convinced ourselves that we are alone and bound in limitation. Breathe. Look at the person next to you and say, even though you might believe you're bound in limitation, you actually are free. Even though you might think that you're bound in limitation, you actually are free. And breathe that in. So there's a story that in Asia, there's a way to catch a monkey. And the way you catch a monkey is that you hollow out a gourd and put it on the ground, stake it to the ground, and you fill it with some sort of thing that attracts monkeys, rice, fruit, nuts, and you cut a hole in it that's just big enough for the monkey to slide its hand into. And what happens is when the monkey grabs the goodies inside, it can't pull its hand out because the hole is too small for the closed hand to get out. And that's how you trap a monkey. And the only way for the monkey to get out and free itself is to let go. Let go. As long as we hold on to our stories of being separate from life and life not being safe, we are caught And we will die in those stories. We will die living those stories, having never experienced the freedom, joy, and love of life. We will try to do life rather than experience life. And again, this chart will be on the website. So one of the major challenges for many is to recognize that life is not always comfortable. I'm sorry. It's not always going to go the way we would like from our limited, small perspective. You've noticed this. I know you've noticed this. Evolution is always pushing us forward. And what evolution means is we're always moving into an area of discomfort. And we need to change our relationship to discomfort as being something to always avoid, to being something to step into. I'm not talking about horrible pain, nasty suffering, or anything like that, but discomfort. Not living in our intellect loves to have everything ordered and proper, and I know how to work my world, yes? But life is constantly saying, no, there's more, there's more, there's more. Go more. And that's uncomfortable for the ego because now I'm going to have to learn something new. I just had a thought during the early part of the service. I haven't talked to Brent about it, but I think we're going to do a little changing of the order of songs next week. Oh my God. I know ministers who have been fired from their jobs because they came into a new community and stopped singing the peace song, which the community had been singing for 20 years, and said, let's do something new. And the result of the community, this is religious science communities, this is in a teaching that says, change your thinking, change your life. They say, what, you want us to change? You're fired, you're out of here. We're not going to change. Breathe. So we have to recognize that life is not always comfortable. It's not always going to go the way that we want it to. I will use the same quote from Mark Nepo that I've used the previous 2 Sundays. If peace comes from seeing the whole, misery or suffering comes from a loss of perspective. If we gain the perspective of the billions of years of evolutionary process that has brought us to this moment, we can begin to trust life, that capital L life, might actually know what it's doing. What a concept. That there might be a greater intelligence at work that is smarter than us. Breathe. That can see further than we do. And here's the thing, it is for us. What if we have the knowing, the deep knowing that life is for us? It's in our favor because we are life in form and it's for itself. It's for its constant, ever-growing evolution. Ernest Holmes says evolution is always forward. It's always creating something new, something more wonderful. And a oneness and a wholeness can't be against itself. So our stories create our experience of the universe. And are they stories of freedom or are they stories of bondage? I mentioned earlier that Richard Rohr uses a concept called the cosmic egg to describe 4 layers of nested stories that shape our perception of life. And the first one is my story. It's our individual story. Each of us has a my story, yes? Okay. And then the next layer up is our story, which is usually our family story, our school's story, our town's story, our religion's story, our some collective story. That's the next layer up. From there, it expands into something called other stories. Oh my God, there's other stories out there? We're seeing that, playing in the world right now. There's only our story. That should be the only story, right? Oh my God, there's other people with other stories and other ways of experiencing life. And then the final one is what he calls the story, what we've been calling the capital T truth, which is just the story that really is operating whether we know it or not. And so what we're witnessing in the world today is a collision of stories about life, with people clinging like the monkey to the bait, to their story, their personal and their collective story. My perspective of the world is the right perspective of the world. Everybody else's is wrong. Okay? Even though the story is holistic and inclusive. So the way out of clinging to our individual and collective stories. The way out is to let go of the I'm right. Anybody encounter? None of you do this, but you know people, yes, who are very much into I'm right. Okay? Our way out is to let go of clinging to our collective and individual stories. It's listening with compassionate, loving curiosity and acceptance. What if, rather than saying you're right or you're wrong, we just said, tell me more about that? You know, tell me more about that. Tell me why you feel that way. Help me to understand you. Letting go of trying to fix, change, get rid of, or even consciously let go of anything. How many of you have tried to let go of things in your past, and how many of you have actually really succeeded in truly, honestly letting go deeply? It's pretty hard. So what happens is, as we accept these stories, as we bring our loving curiosity and compassionate attention, the stories themselves let go of us. And we are no longer controlled by them. And we will experience the truth of freedom and life that is our truth. I invite you this week to practice, to pay attention, to spiritual practice. Pay attention and notice where your stories are running and are creating an experience of bondage, constriction, limitation, of feeling separate from the flow of life. And don't try to fix or change or control them. That just feeds into the core of, I've got to control life more, right? So just lovingly notice and accept that these are old stories running in your life. And it's almost like you just can step aside and look at the storyteller that's going off and going off and going off and say, oh, there's that story again. So that's our first spiritual practice. Are you willing to play with that this week? Great. The second spiritual practice is buy, and here's the key, apply. One of my teachers used to say, if I could tell you the book to buy that will truly change your life, would you buy it again? Because most of us have a book like that sitting on our shelves that we don't apply. So it's buy and apply the book, What's in the Way is the Way, by Mary O'Malley. It's a powerful, wonderful way to really shift things. We're just wrapping up a 10-week class on that book and having some profound releasing, and it's a very gentle process of releasing. So that's the two practices. Pay attention, notice where your stories are running, and just notice them. Don't try to change, fix, alter them. Just, oh, that's the story that's running. And then secondly, buy and apply that book. Are you willing to play with at least one of those this week? I highly recommend both, but are you willing to play with at least one? Okay, a few of you are, yes. My work here is done. I want to close with a quote from Mirabai Starr, and then I'm going to close also with a reading from Ernest. And Mirabai Starr says, "It is in the interior desert where the landscape appears barren that patience," and I would also add the word listening, that patience reveals the miracle of life teeming just below the surface. You know, I lived in Southern California for a while, and I used to go driving through the desert, and I'd look out across, oh, it's barren. And then I started getting out of my car and walking across the desert. Oh my God, it's full of life. It's small life. You have to take the time to stop and appreciate it. And so that's what she's saying here, is that the patience that reveals the miracle of life teeming just below the surface. Spirit is in there somewhere. The more we mindfully observe what is, the more beauty comes into focus. There is nothing broken here, nothing to fix. Rather, the prophet mystic practices sitting with reality as it is. Practices sitting with reality as it is, not trying to make it something else. From that space of quiet listening, we may perceive what is ours to do and tap into the vitality we need to do it. We take up our birthright of belonging and in the spirit of the mystical Jewish teaching of Tikkun Olam, uh, we mend the broken world and restore wholeness to the web of interbeing through loving. We do this through loving. And then finally, from Ernest, all these talks this month are based on talks that Ernest gave in 1958. They're not his talks. They're David's interpretation of his talks, or at least the topics. But he closes this week's talk with saying, our poverty enriches us if we understand it. Limitation proves the infinity, and bondage alone is freedom, because the universe is one system and only one. Let us stretch our imagination. Let us stretch our intellect way out against the horizons of our previous experience, and in the golden glow of the setting sun of that which is passing, let the glories of the day reveal its course and come back against the eastern sky. Alight with hope and many-colored hues of the rising sun, coming across the mountain to spill its light and warmth into the valley and wake the desert lands into the newness of life and bring hope to all of us. When we understand the oneness, when we understand the movement of life, when we understand the flow of life, and when we trust it, we're not running around in our old stories trying to do life and fix life and control life. So I have an affirmation. You'll say this with me. I release old stories of being limited and open to the truth of freedom that is the story of the universe. One more time. I release old stories of being limited and open to the truth of freedom that is the story of the universe. So I do, and so it is.